Thank you and welcome back. Next on the agenda we have a panel discussion around the theme Magnifying Visibility in the Manufacturing Process. In the panel we have key partners from the industry as well as customers, and the panel will be hosted by Tom. So over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Thomas, and welcome back to our roundtable discussion for Industry 4.0. I'm Tom Ruth. I'm the Vice President of the Americas for Quuppa, and with me on today's panel, I have got, I'll go through the bios on each one of you. I've got Chuck Evano, who is a CEO of Aware Innovations. Chuck is the chairman of AIM, the Association for this is a mouthful, Association of Automatic Identification and Mobility. It's easy for me to say, not. He's also a RAIN RFID Alliance board member, the chair of the U.S. Advisors Group for ISO standards for IoT, which specifically on barcoding and RFID standards, IoT and smart cities. So we'll have some interesting discussion around standardization here. Ed is the Director of Sales and Strategy for Industrial IoT at Panasonic. Ed holds a PhD in Technology Management and an MBA, a lethal combination. And he is a well-storied individual here in the IoT space, as he was the Chief Solutions Officer for OmniID, a very prominent, predominantly known for tags and solutions in the IoT market space, recently acquired by Panasonic. I think that's how you got there. And Bob Viega, who's the CEO of RTV Engineering. Bob has a long storied history of over almost 2 decades in the IoT and sensing technologies space for sensing technologies and design. He was an early player in the IoT industry at Savvy Technologies, of which it seems you can't swing a dead cat in this business without hitting somebody who's from that space or from that company. He's also successfully executed a project at Kloeckner Metals, and since everybody on this call knows that we are an RFID, or excuse me, a radio frequency based technology, that usually doesn't go hand in hand with a lot of metallic environments. So we're very proud to trumpet that success story. And it's more than just the technical stuff of how you got it to work in metal in a metallic environment, but also getting an ROI out, which we'll talk a little bit about ROIs in a minute. So in the interest of time, each one of you, as I had mentioned, is all sort of morphed out into this business from RFID. Describe some of your first experiences when you go from RFID to RTLS, where you're adding actual location into that solution. Chuck, I'll start with you.
Well, thanks. And again, we see RTLS and using the Quuppa products as an additive to our solution. We're based on a software platform called ItemAware, and where we can blend the different technologies, whether it's a barcode, the passive RFID, and now the Quuppa BLE solution, to give a total picture. And that helps as you blend the whole thing together, then you get a better picture of where the items are, again, with the fidelity that Quuppa brings to the table. So that transition is not a huge leap, because RFID obviously uses the same basic principles of radio transmission with an identity. We're just changing how we sense the information. So, and again, so it just gives you better fidelity. So it's kind of like there's one cheaper solution, which is, not so good at location, and then the better solution that gives you good location that gives you an ROI.
Yes, thanks, Chuck. I think it helps to point out for our viewing audience that, while Quuppa is just one location technology that's out there, we provide accurate location. That's sort of our calling card, but without the logic that makes relevant sense of it, on top of it, and that's what each one of these companies do. We're nowhere in this particular space of this industry. It's sort of like we say where something is, but so what? It's not until you make that actionable and it makes it relevant for everyone. Ed, I'll ask you, tell me a little bit about how you morphed from RFID and maybe outline some of your earlier experiences, not necessarily with Quuppa, but just in general.
Yeah, sure. We're very involved as an RFID company in what's happening with Industry 4.0, and people are trying to do new things that have never been done before. Batch of one production, real-time location of material, making material smart, making it interact with machines and robots and humans. That space just opens up when you start to think about using AI, using cameras, using real-time RF technologies. So RTLS is one piece in the toolbox to redesign the way we think about industrial processes. We can get more data and more information than we ever could before, and we have better ways to act on it with advanced analytics and visualization engines, artificial intelligence that help you make different decisions in the enterprise. So what's exciting about what's happening in our market is not any individual technology. It's the landscape that this paints to change the way we think about our processes, make them completely flexible, transparent to the customers, tying in demand triggers with the production means. It's really a revolution. You look at companies like Amazon and what they've done by employing these kinds of digital principles, and I think that's going to ripple through the entire industry. Everyone's going to get on the bus and use Industry 4.0 as a real revolution. And Panasonic, of course, plays in so many of these areas. I mean, everything from robotics and automated material conveyance all the way down through camera systems, RF, and location. That it's really fun for me to have a bigger toolbox to go attack these problems with.
And Bob, I know that you were being an early on Quuppa partner here in the U.S. for us. You came to us after being in the space for a while, working with a variety of other technologies. Tell us a little bit about what you and RTV have done, as it pertains to using location, whether it's with Quuppa or how you came to us. Maybe that's a good lead.
Yeah, Tom, is it 4 or 5 years ago now? I still remember at the trade show meeting you guys, watching your little demo, and just seeing that little demo you had at the booth at RFID Journal. It was a game changer. I was like, holy mackerel, we're going to be able to change the way we do things right now. Before everything was, how do I get a choke point? How do I get an antenna read there? There was some early kind of RTLS technology that sort of kind of worked, but not really. And when I saw the accuracy and how well this worked, I saw all the projects that we try to work on as this is a game changer. I'm no longer constrained by where something moves and trying to find a choke point. I can let that asset move any place, and I'm going to be able to track it in real time and give you an accurate location for that. As you mentioned earlier, we were able to go into Klockner Metals, which is a large metal manufacturer. They make huge steel coils. It's a big open space. There are no choke points. They move everything by gantry crane. It's not rows or aisles. And so we were able to go in there and say, I can tell you exactly where that coil is, no matter where you move it and how many times you move it, without any human intervention. And that's kind of the key right there. So everything became automatic. Once you associate that tag to the asset, now the end application, whether that's a middleware or RFID system or their ERP, that location is automatically updated. So now I could tell them that, hey, I'm in finished goods. I put this in a shipping bay. I shipped it out. And all those messages are automatic. So it's really been a game changer. RTV is really one of those, we're one of these companies, we're small, but we tend to get these complex solutions. People usually call us up, hey, how are we ever going to, and that's kind of our forte. And so Quuppa and other passive RTLS technologies have really changed the way we've been able to attack and provide an ROI and solution for customers.
You mentioned a couple of things, and Jason from Klockner Metals talked about this a little bit earlier, where the idea of moving product through not only the process inside the plant, but also between plants and throughout the supply chain. And with that is going to require some level of standardization. Chuck, you do a lot of work in this space. It started with RFID, and today I think a lot of people realize that one man's RFID will work in a variety of places, just like barcoding did prior to that. Tell us what you are seeing for the standardizations, and as it applies to RTLS.
Well, obviously, RTLS has had standardization around it for many years, as Bob well knows. Back with both the Savvy solutions as well as the Zebra awareness solutions. But what's happened with your Quuppa products and BLE, you're getting better resolution with less infrastructure and less cost. And so incorporating that into standards is one of the keys to help deployment and adoption, right? And around standards, it's really about knowing what that thing is so that the industrial Internet of Things can operate properly. As Ed talked about, being able to leverage that information to make decisions using AI, to use that identification also for things like blockchain, and relying on that identification is the key. So the standards are now focused around implementations of technologies, implementing automatic identification data capture, like the BLE and Quuppa, as well as the other technologies, whether it's a barcode or a passive RFID or active RFID, to help identify things for the Internet of Things. So that's where the standardization is going. And again, relying on established standards that Quuppa has, internationally open standards, helps adoption of the technology to help the adoption of the Internet of Things and Industry 4.0.
Yeah, I guess as one of the things that we are seeing as the standardization of different of how we communicate position for indoor positioning, doing it with relative latitude and longitude, or whether people want to see it from a relative position inside whatever is important to their own interior business. But oftentimes a lot of systems where they're combining both GPS data as well as indoor data, they want that to be standardized as well.
And that's right, and that's where, again, it's the application of the technologies and blending them together is the secret to make everything successful.
So one of the things that in this space, there are days, we all have good days and bad days, and there are times when we would say, this would be a great business if we didn't have any customers. But sometimes customers, the promise of IoT is is often pitched as a panacea, to a lot of functional problems, and customers hear, see these pitches. They go to demonstrations in very pristine environments, and then they want to go out to the floor and see that executed just as perfectly as it did in the demonstration room. Just as an example, but give me an example, and I'm going to ask each one of you this. Give me an example of some challenges that you encounter with customer perception of location and with IoT, and what it will bring them, and then there will be a follow-on question in terms of how they approach that. But Bob, I'll start with you.
Oh, I have a great example. We were doing a deployment where we were marrying a weight scale and to an asset. So instead of somebody coming up and scanning the asset and writing everything down and fat fingering weights in, we took a tag ID. We could move the asset on the weight scale, and because we could zone that out so accurately, we could read that when we read asset move into that zone, we were able to go read the scale that was in that zone and take the weight automatically, and took the human intervention out of it. So there was no more fat fingering. The problem that arose, we were able to solve, but all of a sudden it stopped working. We're like, well, I'm not sure. Well, we go back out to the floor. Well, the weight scale seemed to shift, 10 feet this way, and 10, because they would hit it with the forklift, or as they were using it, they would just hit it and move it. It's just a scale that sits on the floor. So a healthy gun going into concrete, keeping it in the zone, solved that problem. But it really, that was that was something where we were able to marry the IoT and location and create an automatic procedure.
But at the same time, there are practical considerations as well that often get that can affect these otherwise not pristine environments. Ed, how about you?
Oh goodness, I've got so many scars. I'm thinking back to some of the best projects. So, what would I give you? One of my favorite ones, I guess, was working with a large construction mat manufacturer. And the initial problem statement was, we have these big mats that we lay down, and we want to be able to track where these mats are. And it should be easy. And the customer said, this is easy. We can do this together. It'll be fine. And then we started talking about it and said, well, how are we actually going to attach these tags? So we're going to drill holes in wet red oak and embed them. And then once we embed those tags in the wet red oak, we're going to press it down into a marsh. And if we have, if the ground's too wet, we might put mats on top of each other till we press them down 8-9 feet down into the marsh. I said, well, that'll be an interesting read scenario. And then we said, well, where does this happen? Well, it happens all over the world, and sometimes in places where there's no cell connectivity, no Wi-Fi, anything like that. Well, that's an interesting use case too. So as you peel back the expectations with different customers, we deal with some of the most unique environments, whether it's heavy metal inside manufacturing or wet marshland, remote wilderness areas. The expectation is it should work. And I think you're quite right when you identified that the early days of RFID, we hit this all the time. People thought it could just be ubiquitous out of the box and it would always work, but it took a while. First, a lot of disappointment, I think, in the industry, and a lot of people that rejected RFID as a technology because it didn't just work. I think people are getting more, pardon the pun here, Bob, savvy to the whole little commercial there for the past. More savvy that this will work, but I think we're entering a new phase that we have to be careful with, and Quuppa is doing great, pioneering and driving the Bluetooth standard this way. People talk about 5G in the same way that we used to talk about RFID in those early days, and I worry that some of those perceptions are creeping back in, that with cell phones and new networking and MIMO antennas, that we can just go ahead and cover everywhere in the world with infinite bandwidth and no issues. So we always have to be vigilant to educate, I think, the market on how important, when you go wireless, thoughtful analysis is on your use case and implementation.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I would add to that is that if technology has taught us anything, that nothing really changes. The good news is that in terms of this 5G discussion, is that, and what it will be, being the panacea, is that we're already starting to talk about 6G.
Let's get one done first.
Oh, no.
Managing user expectations, especially when you're developing standards and you're bringing vendors together, is a huge part of the work here, and absolutely true.
Chuck, how do you guys manage customer expectations, and in terms of how what they want? They want this panacea to swoop in and solve all their problems.
Yeah.
It's not always perfect.
It is not. And again, we start fundamentally with what we call a requirements meeting, and we get them to nail down their business processes, because we understand there may be an opportunity for organizational change, but generally not. I mean, you go into a factory, you go into one of these environments, they're pretty set in their ways. So we have to figure out how to take the technology and map it to their process and build reasonable expectations from the bottom of all the way up to the management level, right? So that one, the biggest thing is at the worker level, oh, you're spying on us, right? Well, no, we're trying to understand the workflow, where the product is. It's not about you. It happens to be a byproduct sometimes, so there's that fine line. But getting that business process nailed down, and then the physical environment and the RF intricacies. That's what a key site survey does, is helps you identify, as both Bob and Ed have pointed out, where we get the scars from. Why didn't this work? It moved. Why did it move? It shouldn't have moved. Or suddenly it's not working. An electromagnetic, a crane, overhead gantry crane, went by and changed how the location is read because it changed how the signals bounced, right? Those are the things that you've got to understand and engineer into your solution. So, we start with the requirements, the process, the engineering, and then we go to implementation, and then you take your knocks because it never works like it's supposed to, right? So then you have to make sure the customer understands it's not going to work the day you hit the on button. There's always going to be tuning.
I mean, you guys do a fair amount of government work, and as you know, there's always the pressure of this is the acceptance date and everything must be working, and then of course there's all the other extraneous factors from service and feature creep to you know, a contract creep, if you will, that occurs. That can always be a challenge in this business. You know, not everything is binary.
That's
Yep.
yeah. I mean, whether it's a government or even on the commercial, one of the things that we've seen lately is somebody will come to us with a definite use case. We want to track it going into work in progress, you know, the receiving to here, and we go, you know, you go in, you kind of give the pitch, you explain how the technology works, you give it, and then they get excited about it. Well, then they tell their IT department, or then other people in these larger companies, or you know, especially military, start seeing. They go, well, wait, can we use this for this too? Well, yeah, we can do that. And then more people get excited. Now you took probably a 3-month sales cycle to do this little part of a facility to now they want to roll out everywhere, and now it becomes a 24-month sales cycle. So you know, trying to maintain that initial customer focus, I think, is sometimes key. Just get it in, get it working, and you could always, what we would call it, the Swiss cheese approach. You always start filling in the holes. You know, get it in, and then you start rolling out to other areas. Because otherwise, it starts ballooning, and you need more layers of signatures to get it going.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. You know, I know that we recently had this conversation with one of your projects that ended up going in that exactly in that direction. You know, do you guys at the executive level, do you all find that, you know, once a good idea, you know, it starts foundationally, but more of a good thing is even better, and so somebody wants to, you know, make the project even bigger as opposed to, you know, having some early successes to draw from?
I think I found, and I was really glad Bob brought that up, we solve a lot of local problems. Someone comes with, I want to optimize this line, or I've got this value stream I'm trying to work on. But Industry 4.0 as a revolution, it is revolutionary. And the sooner we can bring the conversation of solving a local problem up to an enterprise level with the decision maker, the better the projects go. You have to get a vision. I mentioned Amazon as a model for this, a vision of how you're going to connect your demand triggers all the way through your design, you know, what you call digital thread, all the way through the process. And if you can have that vision at the executive suite, everything ties together so much better. The data we generate is not isolated. It's part of the whole enterprise ecosystem. So yeah, it's hard to do because the natural tendency in this kind of thing is to pick off local problems, solve them in isolation, and then try and figure out how do you tie it together later. But it really helps if they have an enterprise vision of what they can do. And that's a big part of what we try to do, is bring that conversation up. It's not easy.
Sometimes that enterprise vision, though, is daunting in its scope, and it can, you know, slow down an organization from really, you know, getting started, you know, or it's just so colossal that, oh, now it requires budget approval and we need to, you know.
I'm not saying that, what you're saying is really important, Tom. You can't implement it all at once. You can't boil the ocean. But when you start that first project, it's good to have a vision of what the overall tapestry should look like. You know, what's our to be 10 years from now as an organization? And if we have that, the local project will become a little bit more focused than it will be if it's just, I'm going to solve this problem to meet a metric for this quarter.
No, I get that. Great conversation, guys. Let's turn this on the other side of that. One of the challenges that we all have with IoT is the issue surrounding the ROIs, and so we know that, you know, a technology that gets put in, and traditionally a lot of technologies, independent of whether we're talking about RTLS or the man in the moon, everything has got its own silo, its own approach, a different technology for each problem that gets addressed. And that's obviously can be a very expensive proposition, especially when some of the use cases may be nice to haves or even the great unknown. As an example, you know, the IoT projects, we usually require analysis, and then the IT department says, oh, we need to call our Splunk rep or our Tableau rep to sit there and, you know, do analysis for another 6 months before we really understand what our next step is going to be. And I'll contrast that against the if this then that type of scenarios, which are really what I think, you know, can help out with industrial automation. And so when you guys approach your customers, how do you get through that challenge of the finding that initial ROI? Chuck, I'll start with you.
Well, since we're fundamentally a software company that implements technology, we approach each one as a project, right? So understanding the business requirements, what the vision is, and then this process, as both Ed and Bob talked about, you know, maybe it's a local small project and then it goes to an enterprise vision. Making sure there's buy-in all the way up the chain is fundamental, right? And then, and again, we have that both with our government and our commercial customers. But then you get that, how you bring it all together in that project plan, in the requirements to deploy it, leveraging the technologies, leveraging that. And so, again, fundamentally as an IT software company that does technology, we start about the data. What kind of data do you need to take the Internet of Things to that next level to get that ROI? The ROI, what is the ROI that you're trying to achieve? And then, you know, will you really get there? What is the realistic expectation? And again, our experience is by defining that well, we get a good ROI because we're helping them either identify where things are so that they can continue their processes, simplifying inventory so they know where their materials are at any given time, where they are in the whole scheme of their enterprise. Those are the keys, right? To get that ROI based on, you know, data. And so that's where we start. And again, good data capture from the BLE Quuppa technologies starts you, where is it, what is it? And then so you can build off of that. Answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was perfect. I guess account management is part of that. And again, setting it, I think the key message that I'm taking away is that making sure that the expectations are mutually understood. And that, you know, you obviously have checkpoints and you're following up with your customer on a regular basis to make sure that those are met. And that may seem like kind of account management or enterprise management 101, but not everyone. I can tell you from, you know, a technology that requires partners, and I see it all through a variety of different partners. Not everyone pursues it in that fashion. So that's good insight. Ed, what about you? How do you guys go for the home run, or do you go for little wins, or you know, do you want to hit it out of the park first and
no, Chuck's exactly right. You start with the singles. You know, if you can bunt a single, you're happy to make that happen to move it forward. But getting the buy-in up the chain is what we seek. You know, we try and elevate the local problem to an enterprise-wide vision. And how you do that often takes a lot of effort and meetings and broadening your champion base to make that go. But it always comes down to the savings either in labor or in inventory or in some other direct materials. You know, we're eliminating paper, we're eliminating different devices. One of the things that's exciting about what Quuppa's done with BLE is you're reducing infrastructure. You know, the infrastructure required to get an accurate RTLS is less than it was when we had choke points and portals and things like that. I think those kinds of things help the ROI case, but you always have to build the ROI case and you have to explain it. I do think it's easier once you get it up to the executive suite when you can build in some of the softer evaluations, talk about corporate strategy, positioning in the marketplace as the market moves and as other competitors implement this kind of Industry 4.0 IoT initiative. That makes it a little bit easier, but you always start with the local problem, hard costs, inventory, labor, you know, and some other indirect costs.
So I get it. It is sort of a grassroots type of strategy there, and I think that's one of the things that that Jason from Klockner Metals was identifying with us, Bob. That, you know, in their example, he knew that it was a very simple standard track and trace, massive facility, lots of items. You know, where are they? And they all look alike, right? So they would spend, even though they had a tracking system with barcoding, and I guess there was some RFID that was going before, it was still a manual effort to go find stuff. And and everything that cascaded, they consumed lots of man hours. They consumed lots of customer dissatisfaction because of delays, and so the idea was, how do we mitigate that by speeding up that process? So I think he knew that on the front end that there were some ROIs that were easily understood through human resource utilization and manpower savings. But what were some of the surprises that they realized?
Oh, yeah, so there were a lot of ancillary ROI pieces that came out of that deployment. One was safety. You go into any one of these facilities, you'll see safety posters all over the place. Safety's number one. Well, one of the biggest factors for safety is somebody rushing. And when you're sitting there trying to find, 4 or 5 assets because the trucks, needs to roll out, and you got, 15 trucks piled up, people are running around, and that's when mistakes happen. Because they know exactly where the asset is, they know exactly where to go. Now everything's a little more relaxed. We reduced, I believe at Klockner, they went from running 3 10-hour shifts, 10 to 12 hour, so there was overlap in the shifts, down to 3 8-hour shifts typically. They drastically reduced their overtime. They were able to get better trucking rates. So one of the things, trucks would come in, they would pile up, they'd be waiting. You may have a truck sitting there out, for an hour or two waiting to get loaded. Well, now that we're moving trucks in and out much faster, because they could go out, they know exactly where the assets are, they could load the truck. Well, now they were able to go some of these bigger carriers and say, hey, we could get you guys in and out, and they're able to negotiate better rates with their carriers. The interaction between shifts, you no longer have to have, the morning shift staying over and telling everybody, hey, we moved this stuff over here, we had to do this, do that, because now he just looks in the system, he goes, hey, I know where everything is. So there was a lot of, I think, ROI that we were able to gain from that wasn't in the original calculation of, hey, this guy was spending 45 minutes to go look for an asset on average, and now he brought it down to 5. And he makes X amount of money, and so here's the ROI. So we find that kind of the being able to track things at this level with this accuracy really has tentacles into a lot of other operations within the operation. Sorry.
Chuck and Ed, you both, since we're talking about resource utilization and workforce agility, if you will, and Chuck, you mentioned early on, getting past this is not about you, it's about the overall process. Do you find that a sweet spot? Is it human resource savings, or is it more on the asset side, or is it work in progress? Where do you guys find yourselves focusing?
Well, ours is both, right? Asset utilization, which also then is human resource utilization, right? Like Bob said, if you know where it is, you're getting more efficient, and that means you're also using your manpower more efficiently and your assets more efficiently, whether it's the actual end item for the work in process or the forklift that's running around trying to go get the items. So that is what we try and build into our picture of ROI. It's all of the above. It's not any one thing.
Yeah, and there's another element we didn't talk about, which is QA, which is a big part of our process. Maybe that's our Japanese roots that gets us there, but creating traceability records to know exactly what happened when and by whom allows you to take your process apart. And especially when you get cars and scars that you have to service, eliminating those quality issues is another one. So I think there's probably, we have 8 things that we look at when we look at ROI statements with our reps. And depending on who you're talking to, there's a different hot button item. Is it safety? Is it quality? Is it material? Is it labor? But I think really the power of this approach is you can touch all of those and build a really strong ROI if you have the right champion on the other side where you can kind of put them together and explain it.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. Oh, again, great discussion here, guys. We're getting some questions from the online community, and you know, some of these are would be interesting. These are not necessarily gratuitous cues for you to talk about Quuppa, but in general.
Not that that's unwelcome, right, Tom?
Yeah, not that it's not unwelcome, but I won't stop you. But tell me a little bit about what technologies that excite you and that you see in the future that are on the forefront of this business. Chuck, I'll start with you.
Well, I had a guy that I worked with for quite a while, and he was always going on about telepathic tags. So when we get there, we'll have reached it, right? But it's really the blending of the data that excites me. It's not any one technology. It's being able to take the data from the Quuppa devices, from other reads and sensors, and present the customers a picture. You know, and that's what we strive to do, is give them a picture so either the system can take action, alert you, or you know, trigger something else. But you have good data to make management decisions, business decisions that help your business, maybe help people, right? There may be a safety issue, it may be a quality issue for the product going out the door. That's what excites us. So, you know, much as I love Quuppa, don't get me wrong, it's really about the data and how we're going to use it that excites me.
Well, you know, Chuck, I'll be the gratuitous plug here. You know, I like to say that Quuppa is the gift that keeps giving. And so that's why we always talk about doing more with location, you know, you know, the more data that we can produce, the more value I think that we're rendering in space. Ed, what about you?
Oh gosh, so many of these technologies really excite me. I'd have to say artificial intelligence is the most interesting one for me right now. I mean, we're doing a lot with vision systems and different data inputs, RF systems, but I watched the BMW initiative, how they have kind of pioneered in our industry applying artificial intelligence, posting all of their AI algorithms freely as freeware online, giving bonuses to their workers all across the organization. Anyone who can think of a way to implement artificial intelligence at their workstation down to a line worker level is encouraged in that company, and they're implementing all sorts of amazing things on taking sensor input and making their job faster or more reliable. The application of these widely available tools now, we never would have thought something like that would be available, that people would share those algorithms and those capabilities and have a very quick, easy to configure capability. I think that's going to do dramatic things for us, especially as we get in this highly responsive kind of batch of one manufacturing world. I think those tools are exciting. So I guess I'll put my chip down on AI as being an interesting piece.
So I guess that sort of lends itself to what Chuck was talking about in terms of clairvoyance, right?
Yeah. That's where the telepathic tag will come from, made out of unobtainium. Yeah.
Bob, what about you?
Well, you know, as Chuck said, you know, kind of tying everything together, it's really the blending of these different technologies. You know, Quuppa really kind of was the eye opener for me on how RTLS can actually work in some of these tough RF environments. But then, you know, marrying that with, you know, Ed's old company, you know, we just developed a solution where we integrated a Quuppa BLE tag to a LoRa GPS tag. And now we were able to track outdoor assets. You know, going out where you really don't want to put any infrastructure. Even though Quuppa does work outdoors, you still need power, you still need communication. But if I have a, you know, several acre lot, I just wanted to see where that is, and GPS kind of fits right there. But then as I come into a facility, now now Quuppa takes over, and then marrying that to, you know, a passive RTLS, such as RF controls, where now I have a ton of little parts, or I'm going to ship this out to different customers. Well, I don't want to use my expensive BLE tag. I just want to put a passive tag on that. So being able to combine these actual working technologies, and I think that's the key. You know, I think we went through a period in this industry where everybody had the greatest tracking system, and it all worked in a lab. But then you went out there and tried to actually implement it, and it was like, holy crap, this, you know, the dot's all over the place. Well, now the dot is where it is. You know, thanks to companies like Quuppa, RF Controls, Omni ID. You know, Zebra's done a lot in this space as well, and Pinch. So, you know, I think the standard on how well this technology works has certainly risen, and there's you know, a certain expectation now. And you can go and say, hey, you know, it was nice to see your technology, but it doesn't quite work. You know, you can go back to companies like Quuppa and say, I know it's going to work. I know it's going to work in this environment.
Thank you for bringing that back to Quuppa, Bob. So,
So yeah, you asked.
so, no, in all seriousness, fellas, what Bob brings up an interesting point, and we were going to have a tag representative on this call. Let's talk about tags for a minute. What, you know, they come in all different shapes and sizes and form factors and a variety of different sensors. What's new and exciting in the tag business, on the tag side of this business? Ed, I'll start with you.
A million things. I mean, what's not exciting about tags? I love tags, having been with Omni ID for a long time. But you've got special sensors that are going on now. I think about all the vaccine transport going on with cold chain applications. That's really blown up. All the contact tracing going on with tags that are, you know, wearables, wristbands, you know, to keep employees the right social distance apart. You've got lots of hybrid tags, kind of like Bob talked about, a LoRa, Bluetooth, a GPS, you know, a UWB. There's a lot of mixing of technologies to enable everything, and all the ruggedness that's happening, explosion-proof tags, tags that can operate in harsh environments. So it's just, it used to be people would say, I can't tag this. There's no way I can tag this. It's going in an oven. It's going to have these things. I don't think there's a use case yet I have found, whether it's cryogenic or harsh environment, that there isn't a tag for. We're living in a time where the ecosystem is so rich. You can really realize things that weren't possible, you know, 10, 20 years ago. So there's a lot going on in tags, and they're a key part of the system. And what Quuppa's doing with their partner ecosystem and building profiles and building standards is a big part of that initiative. You know, we need more of that across the whole ecosystem to make it go.
Yeah, I think as an example, you know, Bob makes some of his own tags for some of the different clients that he's got there. You know, sort of springboarding off of what it is that that we offer in terms of an open tag ecosystem. And Chuck, I know that you guys have a relationship with a variety of different tag partners. Ed mentioned ruggedized tags like Confidex as an example. What are you seeing in the tag space? And, you know, since you mentioned standardization at the beginning, we talked a little bit about that. And obviously, you know, as the BLE standards morph, this is something that we're obviously keeping a close eye on. But where do you see the tag business going, you know, in terms of how it's going to affect your business?
Well, we're getting a lot more. Let's talk about your active technologies like Quuppa's beacons. You know, battery life is going to be the huge thing, right? And we've made such leaps and bounds in the last 5 years on battery tech, where we're now getting the life out of active tags that we hadn't seen before. And then we're getting better smarts in our chips so that we can control battery usage and signaling. So that's pretty exciting on the tag side, whether it's the active tags that are the GPS types that Bob was talking about outdoors, or the indoor ones. The other part is the read ranges of the new chipsets in the tags is getting great. And I think there's becoming more of a realization that the license plate tag is really a good solution for a lot of things now that we have, as we've talked about, 5G connectivity and cloud infrastructure. You don't need to put all this data on the tag. You just need an ID more than anything else. And so I think we're going to see that evolution back toward the smaller, less expensive, not cheap, less expensive tags that help us get our jobs done, which also increases the read rates, right? If you're not having to read all this extra data, you're going to be able to respond quicker, which is going to be very important to the IoT world. So those are the things that excite me from the tag perspective.
I didn't hear anybody say anything about energy harvesting. What are your guys' thoughts? What are your thoughts on that, Bob?
You know, if the business process and what it's doing enables you for energy harvesting. I think it's a great add-on. Unfortunately, a lot of the business cases we see where we're tracking an asset, and in a tag this small, it probably costs more to harvest the energy than it does to change the battery or the tag. So there's that, ROI that you just got to look at. Am I going to build a $40 tag that lasts a year longer, or just a $10 tag that I replace a 10-cent battery on?
And I guess it's a function of how often you guys are going to go back and forth on that, or how often someone's going to go out into the field to retrieve, replace.
Yeah, I mean, if you're tagging, something that's constantly moving, that has motion, that has, something where you could harvest the energy, that's great. But, from a kind of an all-over tag, that's a tough build, I think. Unless you want to make a big tag, and it's out in the sun all the time. Yeah, maybe you could get some solar, but does it work up in Chuck's area in the winter when it's 40 below and it's snowing all the time? So and energy harvesting is something that's gonna is coming along. It's making its strides, but I think from at least where I see it right now, it's not quite there yet.
Yeah, I feel sad for some of our folks that are working in this area, and we don't have any of those tag vendors on the call, so maybe I can talk about them in the abstract. There's been a lot of good work on things like passive BLE and passive UWB and passive Wi-Fi. Trying to dream about a label that could be, actuated by interrogation, like a classic UHF or RFID rain tag. And I think that what's happened in that industry over the years is they've worked on these designs. They've gotten really low power consumption chipsets that can really be efficient, but unfortunately it hasn't resulted in people taking energy harvesting as the approach. You now just put a nice battery in there for 10 cents and it lasts 10 years. So I think the greatest contribution to the energy from the energy harvesting side so far in the business has been it's made more energy efficient structures and chipsets that have allowed us to get better battery life. But the real investment, trillions of dollars are being invested in batteries. I mean, speaking from the Panasonic side, where we're kind of a leader in battery technology, you don't want to even look at those growth rates that are happening in that business unit. I'm always ashamed to go to the meetings and see how much money they're making in battery. I think it's more likely the trend will be that batteries are just getting better and cheaper, and it's going to be even harder for them to catch up on the ROI statement for energy harvesting. I can't see those lines intersecting in the future.
Yeah, that's interesting. Chuck, what about you?
Well, as I said, I started off with the battery life is one of the exciting things in the active world, so I'd agree. The other thing that I think we haven't talked about yet are the sensors we can attach to tags, right? We've been doing humidity, water, temperatures. All those are now almost ubiquitous. I mean, those are essentially dime a dozen. I know that what Mercedes has been throwing in moisture detecting tags for quite a while. So it's the other sensors that we can now add in, that we would not normally have thought of. We can now, both in active and passive type tags, things like shock, things like the G-forces, for example, the temperature, humidity, you name it, we can now think about it.
Yeah, that's I guess that's one of the other things we touched on earlier is the addition of all this other information. As you had said, that goes hand in hand with what gets you excited about the inclusion of other data, as well as being able to parlay that across with location. And I guess in summary on that topic, it's also one of the things that that also brings in new technologies and new solutions can beget new problems that need to be managed. In terms of power and power management. So team, first of all, it's an honor and a privilege to have the three of you on here for a great conversation, kind of bringing all aspects of thought leadership, execution in the market, and it's just I'm quite honored and humbled to be here with you. So thank you so much for your time. Thomas, I'm going to hand the baton back to you, and thank you again, one and all, for your time today.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, panelists. Interesting discussion. I truly enjoyed it. We're coming to a close of the day, but please be back tomorrow at the same time. In tomorrow's program, we'll share the Quuppa strategy, and instead of the manufacturing theme, we'll be diving into the area around healthcare and how healthcare is helping our partners innovate in their businesses around healthcare. So thank you for today, and don't worry if you missed today's program. All the presentations and panel discussions are recorded and can be watched afterwards. So with that, thank you and see you tomorrow.